Hello, everyone, and thanks for giving us your time today for VR Download. I'm Ian Hamilton in New York, joined by David Heaney in London, broadcasting this episode for us today as we discuss the next steps in personal computing. I'm wearing a Quest 3, and we're using David's VR studios with hand tracking and meta avatars. We've got a tablet in front of us that shows us live comments, so if you have any questions about VR, put it out there, and our community might be able to help you out. We will try to address comments over the course of the show. You can listen to us on your podcast platform of choice and become a member on UploadVR.com to support our work directly. David, what do we have today?
Hello, everyone. It's good to be back in the studio. It's another warm day in the UK, so I'll be sweating through this, but we don't have as many topics as usual, but we're still going to go quite deep into some of them. So first, we'll talk about Meta's AR/VR quarterly revenue continuing to grow year over year in 2024. As Mark Zuckerberg says, Quest 3 sales are outpacing our expectations. We'll then talk about the open beta of the PC version of VRChat getting native support for hand tracking. And then we'll talk a little bit about some MetaQuest software tech. We'll talk about the Quest V68 update, which brings latency and visual improvements to Quest 3, a range of other improvements to Quest 2 and Pro 2, and a new app called Layout, a new first-party app called Layout. We'll then talk about Meta's XR Audio SDK getting acoustic ray tracing for realistic sound propagation simulation. Sound is one of those things that isn't given enough attention in this industry, so we'll be talking about it for once. And we'll then talk about Virtuix Omni One, the long in development integrated home VR treadmill system that the company claims will finally start shipping in September. We'll finish off by talking about PlayStation VR2. So if you've somehow missed it, PlayStation VR2 is on sale for $350, a significant discount from its regular price of $550. And alongside that, we'll talk about the report claiming that a retailer sold more PlayStation VR2 headsets in the first day of this sale, one day, than all year so far at the regular price. And we'll talk obviously about what that means for the entire industry when it comes to price sensitivity of VR headset hardware.
Hello to everyone in our comments. It's really cool to see the conversation that happened before we even got in here. I read all of it, catching up on everything. It's hello to Biggs and Ryan, a couple of our members there from YouTube, tuning in today. And then we've got Blair as well. I also see everyone calling out where they're watching us from, which is neat to not even ask where you're watching from and see people know that we love to hear that. So I'm seeing Colorado and Canada, as well as I think Tennessee out there. That's going to be some hot locations out there. So apologize to anyone who is experiencing the heat like David is. I have started to try to learn how to transfer Celsius into Fahrenheit in respect to your culture, David. Let's see. A lot of really cool discussion as well in our comments that will relate to our subjects as we get into them. But why don't we get right into that first one as we come back to our comments. And of course, do share out this link to other people, get them in here. I know we've got some longtime believers in VR technology here in our audience, people who have invested their livelihoods into this idea that people are going to wear headsets in the future. And I even saw it in the comments that people are tuning in to watch with us, the other fanatics who are already believers, because the people in their physical world are tired of hearing it from them. So you're here, you're in a safe place with us to discuss your obsessions, and we'll make sure that we'll bring those people in eventually, get them in here and show them why VR is so powerful over time. David, why don't we get into that first subject?
Sure. So Andrew Tech in the comments saying that they're tuning in from San Antonio and just flexing on me by saying that he has air conditioning. I wish I did. As we talk about on the show quite a lot, the UK homes are designed to retain heat, not get it away, because the UK climate used to be a lot colder than it is now. But exactly, let's jump into that first topic. So if you're not familiar with sort of business and finance terms, businesses report their revenue typically in quarters. So the year divided into 4 3-month segments: Q1, Q2, Q3, and Q4. And so yesterday, Meta reported its earnings for Q2 2024, the second quarter of 2024. And during this earnings call with investors, where it's Mark Zuckerberg and the rest of the executive team, including the chief financial officer, Susan Lee, talking to investors, Mark Zuckerberg said that Quest 3 sales are outpacing our expectations. Now, we don't know what their expectations were. The one thing I would say, as I always point out when we're talking about earnings calls, though, is that this isn't quite the same as a press release. Generally, they do try to be a little bit more honest and direct with investors than they do with press releases, as companies do in general, because investors are going to come back to bite if it turns out that you're misleading them there. But let's talk about the actual numbers here, because what we've seen is that 2024 so far in the first two quarters is completely reversing the trend of last year. So last year, Meta's revenue had declined in 2023. 2023, from its Reality Labs division, which is the division behind Quest headsets, the Horizon platform, the Ray-Ban glasses, and what 50% of their spending goes towards is the research and development of AR glasses. So all of that is in this Reality Labs division. And since quarter four of 2020, Meta has broken out its financials separately from the rest of the business. And so 2023 had seen, quite a decline, with the exception of quarter four when Quest 3 had come out. But what we saw in those first three quarters, and especially the first two that we'll be talking about today, to compare them to the first two of 2024, is that we saw really record lows in those first two quarters, because Quest 2 was near the end of its life cycle, right? It was almost 3 years old. Quest Pro had failed on the market, as we've discussed in earlier episodes, and Quest 3 had already been leaked and then at the very end of quarter two announced. So you had these people who were looking at Meta's proposition saying, you're still selling Quest 2 for the same price as when it was launched, $300. We know that there's another headset probably coming out in like 6 months, and that's why presumably you see these very low sales. But we have seen now a rebound in this. As we discussed at the time, quarter four of 2023, when Quest 3 launched, was Reality Labs' highest ever revenue. And now we see an increase from quarter one 2023 to quarter one 2024, and again from quarter two 2023 to quarter two of 2024. So we're seeing that Quest 3 is decently successful on the market. But what you will notice is that it's not at the levels of where Quest 2 was in these first two quarters of these 2 years. Yes, it's higher than 2021, but quarter two of 2022 was higher than quarter two of 2024. And so, as we'll discuss many times in this show, as we have discussed many times on this show, the obvious reason here is that Quest 3 is this higher price product at $500. The success of Quest 2 in many ways was because of its price point at $300. That is a very important price point. And as we'll discuss at the end of the show, when we talk about PlayStation VR2, price really matters. And each $100 decrease of price has an exponential effect on sales, not linear. So what we expect Meta to announce at Connect, and potentially even just launch at Connect, is Quest 3S, a cheaper version of Quest 3 that has the same chipset, the same mixed reality capabilities, but uses the old lenses and display from Quest 2 to get the price down. And that's where we expect, if that is a success, Meta can start to build into record revenues again, building on Quest 3's launch.
So thank you to Fraj's comment here. I hope you guys know how amazing you guys are in VR News. So many others source your work. Thank you. And we do appreciate that comment, and that is what we try to do. We try to be very useful, very accurate where others are not, and have, dig into some of the underlying things that other sources really just surface cover and misconstrue. And I knew we would see Blair in our comments here because he knows what's coming. He knows that he is on the hook. So for those of you who aren't familiar, Blair is a longtime VR developer that's anti-cleric in our comments. We've got Guy Godin, the creator of Virtual Desktop. I want to talk to you, Guy Godin, of Virtual Desktop. Did you hear in the quarterly earnings call yesterday where Mark Zuckerberg said that Virtual Desktop is a major use of Quest headsets? But David and I immediately discussed it. Did he mean that in the abstract way, like just virtual desktop as a general term, or did he actually mean Guy Godin's virtual desktop app? He probably meant it in a more general term, right?
Yeah, it's interesting to think because he said the exact words virtual desktop. This was Mark Zuckerberg talking about the key use cases of Quest 3 beyond gaming. He was saying they're seeing a big trend from Quest 2 being this gaming focused headset to Quest 3 being used for all of these productivity and other use cases because you have that mixed reality pass through background. If you look at Zuckerberg's own transcript, he says extending your PC via things like virtual desktop, and he has virtual desktop with lowercase, suggesting he's talking about the general concept of a virtual desktop, and there are multiple apps on Quest, but it's entirely possible he meant the app. I do think the fact that in his text that he posted on his own social media feeds, it was lowercase suggests it probably wasn't the app, because anywhere else he was referencing a specific product, he would have used title case, but we don't know.
Yeah. So, and Guy adding that productivity at work is such a small percentage of usage. I agree with that and understand it, but I wonder how that's going to change over time. To go on to the Blair thing, why I was bringing that up for the people that aren't familiar, we have a bit of a gentleman's bet going with Blair here that this revenue number here, 1.07 billion for the Q4 of 2023, we're going to see that number dwarfed by the Q4 revenue for 2024. So you go 2 bars out, we'll see one more bar built out this year, right? We'll see Q3 somewhere in this region right here. And then early next year, Meta will come out with its quarterly earnings and do another bar here that will show us what Q4 2024 does. That's the Q4 2024 revenue is going to be, or yeah, Q4 2024 revenue is going to be the quarter that includes Christmas and Black Friday sales. So everyone that goes and gets lured into buying a Quest headset around the November to December timeframe, that is the VR developer Super Bowl. That is the most important period for all VR developers. There are companies that will make or break their next year of planning. That they will know how many people they can hire to work on their games for the following year based on how many sales they make during that quarter. So all these devs are working to get their ducks in a row for this period at the end of the year. And we have this bet going with Blair that when we see the Quest 3S and the Quest 3 both running games like Batman and Alien and Resident Evil and Roblox and Rec Room and VRChat, you've got Quest Plus subscriptions and people buying Quest headsets to do fitness via Supernatural. When you combine all of those things that Meta has put into place and actually constrained itself over these last few quarters by trying to ship the Quest 3, I think at cost is what they've said. They're not taking a loss on each of the headsets sold for Quest 3. They've had to transition from what they were doing earlier to set up their market and set up their devs for what we're about to see. And so we've bet Blair there that when we get to next year, this whole chart is probably going to end up being smaller because there's a bigger bar to show over there on the right.
Yeah, so just if anyone's wondering why are we comparing quarters rather than consecutive quarters, why are we comparing year over year? That phrase, if you don't know what it means, it just means that you look at a certain quarter of one year and then you compare it to the same quarter of the next year. And you do that because consumer electronics are very much so seasonal, right? You notice on this chart instantly that the biggest quarters are always quarter 4. That's when you have Black Friday, you have all of the religious holidays like Christmas and other ones that involve gift giving. And also there's a winter effect, right? So the days are getting shorter, the evenings are getting darker, people spend more time indoors, and that's when you kind of see things like gaming really start to take off in the same way that sometimes in summer when people are outdoors, they're out doing activities, you can sometimes see a reduction. But of course, that has to be balanced with the fact that then school holidays are during the summer. It's quite a complex analysis. But, in reference to this bet that Ian's talking about, you can see here, back here, this is Quest 2's launch season. And you can see that what we noted in Q4 of 2023, when those results came out, is that Quest 3's launch from a revenue perspective was bigger than Quest 2's and bigger than any of these 3 Quest 2 Christmases. So our kind of expectation here is that what we will see in Q4 of 2024, which again is 2 earnings releases from now, around 6 months out from now, is that the combination of Quest 3S, that cheaper Quest 3 that we expect to come in around $300, and Quest 3 with new content like mixed reality games like Starship Home that actually take advantage of the mixed reality capabilities, and then obviously AAA titles like Batman and Alien and some of those other titles coming up that we will see a record, but we'll have to see. And we should probably now talk about the other side of this graph, which is, of course, costs. And this is what you'll see most of the rest of the media focus more heavily on than revenue. Because if you then take these same revenue numbers and you compare it to the costs, you can see that Reality Labs is making a significant loss over time. Loss in quotes because that's the financial term. So in this quarter we're talking about, quarter 2 of 2024, they brought in $353 million of revenue, but against $4.84 billion in costs, netting a 4.5 billion loss. But while you will always see this described in the media as a loss, it is far more accurate to describe it as an investment. The reason being that the majority of this spending is going towards the research and development of AR glasses, a product line that hasn't even launched yet. So this is not the cost of running the Quest business. This is the cost of all of Meta's AR and VR research, ops, staffing, everything all together. The other fact is that even mixed reality headsets like Quest are still very early on. This is still the start of this industry. There is a long way to go. We are still at the point where this is nowhere near maturity. With each generation going Quest 2 to Quest 3 to Quest 4 to Quest 5, you're going to see significant increases in capabilities. As developers are getting more experience at building games, as studios are able to fund bigger and bigger content, you're going to see this industry rapidly expand. So Meta has even said this to investors over and over, right? This isn't like an unexpected shock. Every year, the CFO, Susan Lee, every quarter, the CFO, Susan Lee, tells investors Reality Labs costs are going to increase next year as they continue with ongoing product development efforts and our investments to further scale the ecosystem. The only kind of tide against this we've seen is that recently the information reported that Meta has told the hardware parts of Reality Labs to cut spending by 20% by 2026. So as we discussed, I think it was last week or maybe the week before when that report came out, Meta is likely, as they start to get into the era of Quest 4 and Quest Pro 2, going to try and scale down these costs and try and make this eventually a profitable business. Now, again, you won't hear this in the mainstream tech media that will just paint every investment in AR and VR as a loss and every investment in AI as an investment. But Mark Zuckerberg has told investors dozens of times that the profitability path for Reality Labs is the 2030s, the 2030s, not anytime soon. So Meta will be aiming to scale these costs down and increase these revenues with future products and expanded ecosystem into the 2030s.
Yeah, and I'm seeing questions in our comments that are very hard to answer right now. We don't know the answers to some of these questions because Meta hasn't given us that visibility. But right now, in the quarterly earnings call, Mark Zuckerberg made it clear that their Meta Ray-Ban glasses are a bigger hit than they expected. So this is the second generation of their smart glasses. They don't have any tracking inside of them for real world 6-DoF movement. There's no display in them for getting feedback visually on what you see. There's only a phone connection that provides you a data connection with some updates from your phone's cellular connection to tell you information about what you see and that sort of thing. Well, these things are a major hit for Meta, despite the fact that they don't have any of that cool stuff. And yeah, sorry, go ahead, David.
No, that's completely valid analysis. I was just going to point out one thing that our commenters are asking, I think is directly relevant to what you're saying, which is that you actually won't see the Ray-Bans on this because they are technically sold as a Luxottica product. It's actually Ray-Ban selling you that hardware. We don't know the exact financing system here as to what is the arrangement, but it has been reported speculatively that there's a kind of licensing agreement where Meta may be getting, maybe a 10% cut on each glasses. That's a completely random number I've thrown out. I'm just giving it as an example. So you're not going to see massive revenues here from that. That's going to be seen in Luxottica's financial reports.
But what about the losses? That's to respond there. What about the losses and the money that might be coming out of those red bars to stand up this business for both Meta and for
Sure,
Ray-Ban?
that's completely valid. The cost of developing these products, of Meta putting in to develop the audio, all of that goes in here. One thing I've said repeatedly about the Ray-Ban glasses, which is ironic given how bad the microphone on Quest is that the Ray-Ban Meta glasses have a better microphone than almost any consumer worn device of their price you will find. Like when you take phone calls on them, many people will tell you just, wow, your voice sounds incredible. Even when you're out in the street, I think they have 5 microphones on them each. And the audio they're able to produce from those tiny little speakers is really incredible. We know that Meta has said that a lot of its audio R&D has gone into this product, and you start to see that now. And soon next year, we'll see some of the other R&D come in as they expand to HUD glasses too.
Yeah, so we are going to be watching this very, very closely, the red bars, and see. Meta is warning that the red bars are going to get larger. They're warning their investors that it's going to continue. The question is, what is the breakdown of glasses to headsets, and where are they choosing to take a loss versus making a pure hardware profit on stuff? And then, of course, our commenters are pointing out that behind the scenes, Meta is lining up a whole bunch of partners to carry the operating system that is inside the Quest. They're calling it Horizon OS now. And there's going to be other headsets running that from other manufacturers. But what we have to watch for these next few months are going to be so fascinating. It's been a long time since we've had a period like the next few months. We've actually been waiting for this for years. We've known that Apple has been building a headset for a very long time. What has happened is those headsets have been put back to the drawing board. I think they've said, no, now is not the right time to ship. Let's go to something else and ship it out a few years later. Well, there was also the COVID-19 pandemic that altered manufacturing plans on a global scale over the last few years. It's been a traumatic couple of years for manufacturers to try to build out new products for this new era of personal computing. And so what we have here happening now is something we actually have expected to happen years ago. We were just didn't see it happen, but we have Android XR looking like it's coming together to be announced very soon. So this is Google trying to hold on to its last great platform, right? They're being decimated left and right over Google search and the changes that are happening with AI to search. And they have this Android platform they've held on to with Google services very, very carefully for very many years. They are supposedly partnering with Samsung to develop Android XR. Well, what that's lining up is very soon in the future, we're going to have Meta Connect, where Meta will show off its future-facing, where we expect them to show off their holographic glasses, this idea that they're going to have actual displays in front of you. It's going to be way too expensive. This is a far-off idea for them, but they want to paint a picture of the end game for Meta. They want to show journalists and developers, hey, this is why you should bet on us long term and bring your apps to us. And that's going to come alongside Quest 3 and Quest 3S, as well as Meta effectively forking Android in order to have its own operating system, this Horizon OS. It can hand off to partners to ship headsets that could be, I saw it in our comments, people loving those OLED displays. Well, Meta has abandoned OLED displays more or less in their headsets. They've said to their users, actually, it isn't worth it to us right now to give you true darkness inside your scenes in VR. Well, that is something they can now give to partners to ship that headset on Horizon OS with the OLED display at a different price, and Meta can focus on the core idea. Well, we've got Android, we've got Apple building the Apple Vision Pro, and a lot of our commenters and our audience have a hard time understanding what Apple is doing there because of all the different terminology about it's a crazy high price that no one wants to pay. Well, we're all setting up for 2025 where we should see many, many more affordable VR headsets on the market. Plus, You're going to see every company under the sun try some kind of glasses with a display on it to try to beat Meta to the punch before they can actually ship the glasses that they're going to preview. Meanwhile, the VR headsets are going to go crazy with sales, I would imagine, in the very near future. But that's all speculation. We'll have to see how it actually pans out. It's just one, two, three over August, September, October, November. It's going to be a crazy changing market for everyone.
Yeah, we've seen a real acceleration of all of this VR hardware over the past 12 months, and we expect there's going to be no slowdown. We're going to see a lot of entries. We're going to see a lot of interesting ideas and headsets at different price points. And, from Meta's perspective, when we look at all the reports and rumors, it's looking like, we're going to see a Quest 3S cheaper headset this year, then HUD glasses next year, glasses with a heads-up display, then a Quest 4 the year after. In fact, two Quest 4 models, presumably a Quest 4S and a Quest 4 coming in at the same time instead of staggered. And then the year after that, 2027, we expect a Quest Pro 2. So they have a significant number of products in development right now. And we even expect perhaps that in 2027, the first AR glasses consumer product might arrive as something you can buy from Meta. And we'll have to see what other companies try to beat them there first. Are we ready to talk about that VRChat news, or is there anything else you'd like to add, Ian?
Let's just briefly mention, because there's a couple comments here going on, people mentioning Windows mixed reality and how cool that was, at least conceptually back in the day, right? Windows, Microsoft tried to do a similar approach with its own operating system. It tried to protect Windows and the establishment that Windows has by partnering with a whole bunch of manufacturers to build Windows mixed reality headsets. And I sat down with the head of that project, and he's basically explaining to me that they're letting manufacturers do whatever they want when it comes to input and frame rate and the types of displays they go in. They're just handling the specs that run the system. They don't really care what the manufacturers do. They can pick their own options. Well, that failed miserably. That whole effort is end of life. Everyone has been referred to Steam for years, and we still need to respect and understand that Steam has kind of continued on a singular path from the start of this to now, and it's been very hard for other companies to wedge in. The question we have is is the market big enough outside of Meta's own headsets to support these other manufacturers? And of course, Microsoft itself is looking like it's going to become an adopter of the Horizon OS in its own ecosystem a little bit, connecting to Xbox.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, we know that there's probably going to be this Quest 3 Xbox edition that's essentially like a black Quest 3 with an Xbox controller in the box. It doesn't sound like Microsoft's going to build their own headset, but what Microsoft is, and this is their new strategy right now, is a software partner for Meta. Microsoft wants to be that link to a higher performance productivity device. They are planning to release their own Windows app for Quest that lets you directly connect to your Windows PC, just as you can with third-party applications today, such as Virtual Desktop. But Microsoft is hoping that its first-party integration will make you choose it. For example, there's no streamer to install or update. It's going to be built into Windows. Another example being that they're going to have this API to allow developers to actually bring out 3D elements of Windows apps. So you'll be connected to your Windows PC with this virtual flat screen monitor, but then you'll be able to pull out 3D elements of, say, a 3D modeling application or a CAD application. It remains to be seen how well that gets adopted, but that's Microsoft's plan for now. Yeah, I can see that there's a comment here. They want to be a service provider for for Meta's platform. They are hooking themselves onto Meta as a major partner, and that's Microsoft's plan for now. Windows mixed reality, an interesting platform in itself, but I just don't think as a PC platform they bothered to invest in it, and they didn't really make the leap to standalone other than through HoloLens.
So Quentin, a very long-time member of our YouTube channel, with a question here that we should respond to. So thank you, Quentin. And so they're asking, I'm curious, what are each of your top 1 to 3 upcoming technologies? Not necessarily products. They're looking for individual technologies that will push XR forward. I'll take this first, David, while you think about your 1 to 3 technologies, because I have a fresh article in my mind. I wrote an editorial last week about pairing the Ray-Ban glasses to MetaQuest 3, and it gave me a structure to think about what would those technologies be? I think it's gonna be LTE or cellular connection on your wrist. It's going to be haptics, actual true haptics, either at the wrist or with gloves. And then I think the third one that I'll throw out there would be varifocal displays. So when your eyes can focus naturally, as they do in the real world, inside of a VR headset, that's going to be a powerful amplifier in my mind for comfort, for all day wearables, for the believability. I guess you could add HDR as like anything that moves the visuals forward is going to be like this big thing. We've had the same rough field of view in VR headsets for a very long time now, and I don't know if that's going to change because you've got other things like HDR and varifocal optics that could make your experience much better before you go back to giving people that peripheral view that they're not really looking at that much anyways, right? It's going to be in the center of your vision wherever you're looking as the main thing that matters to you for a long time. And then the haptics and LTE connection. So in that article, I outlined this idea that if you really want to move past laptops and phones as personal computers, you got to put a cellular connection or an all-day internet connection on your person somewhere else. You don't want to have all that heat and weight on your head because it's competing with so many other things. The natural place to put it is on your wrist. So there is a path there, in my opinion, to all-day wearables that replace personal computers. And yeah, there's the way to do that with those technologies. David, what are your technologies?
It's kind of hard to distill into one or three, but I'll make an attempt anyway. One would be cheaper and larger micro OLED displays. So the micro OLED displays we have today are slightly too small to make it practical to have a wider field of view, and they're obviously much too expensive. We expect both of these things to be solved in the next 2 to 5 years, as production scaled up and as they figure out better ways of making these that, for example, use that don't use a light layer. It's just a direct RGB micro OLED panel. We'll have to see that happen, because then you can see headsets that probably not quite at mainline Quest affordability anytime soon, but a little bit higher, that give you that ultra high pixel density and perfect contrast and true blacks in headsets that don't cost Apple Vision Pro price range. That's one. Another one is more efficient pancake lenses. So the current way that pancake lenses do polarization is very, very optically inefficient, and it actually kills about 80% to 90% of the display panel's brightness. The brightness you see in your eyes through a pancake lens headset is 80% lower than the actual panel. If you took that lens out of the way, you just see this massive brightness that you weren't actually getting to see. And so there are new techniques being worked on to push past that and get to 50%, even 75%. And eventually, obviously, the ideal is to get to like 80, 90% efficiency, because not only can you get a brighter display then if that's what you want, but you can also run these headsets for a lot longer in terms of battery life, because you're not having to waste all of that display brightness to get the same output brightness. I wonder if there's a third technology I can think of for now. One I would just say is, this is maybe a bit boring, but just the advancement of mobile chips, right? What we see in standalone headsets particularly is that the advancements are all under the hood really being driven by the mobile chips, right? So when you go from Quest Pro to Quest 3, it wasn't that Meta couldn't deliver the right resolution of cameras to get the pass-through to be better. It wasn't that, there was some sort of like more expensive sensor array in Quest 3 other than just adding a depth projector, which isn't relevant to the normal pass-through. It's that the chipset is able to process more bandwidth from the cameras. And it's on Vision Pro, right? It's not that Apple couldn't have put a higher than 6.5 megapixel camera into Vision Pro cameras for pass-through. It's just that they can't process the bandwidth of that on the R1. So there'll be an R2, or they'll integrate it into a singular chip for the next Vision or Vision Pro. Meta, where they will work with Qualcomm, and there will be a XR2 Gen 3 one day, and it will be able to process more camera bandwidth. And that's how you get this better mixed reality. It's also how you get a bunch of other things, not just the obvious things like better game performance, but also expanded tracking capabilities, right? Quest 3, it isn't that Quest 3 can do inside out upper body tracking because the cameras are sideways and facing down. That makes it possible from a camera perspective. But Quest Pro has those exact same camera positions on the side, and it can't do inside out body tracking. Why? Because there's not enough performance room on the chipset. So what we might see in a Quest 4 with a new chipset is that maybe with the right camera positioning and enough NPU power, the neural processing unit, the ability to track your body as well, your lower body as well. You might be able to track your legs when that's visible. And then obviously it'll also enable things like Ian is putting up now, which is, the ability to render codec avatars, photorealistic avatars natively on device rather than having to use a high-end PC like is required today. You're muted, Ian.
I didn't put the codec avatars at the top of my tech, but it is at the top of my mind of the tech that most excites me, that it most kind of explains why we do this, why we think this is the future. Right now, you're looking at avatars that are animated by interpreting the sounds coming out of a microphone and then syncing up the lip movements of this avatar to those sounds. So David has built that into his technology here, and my mouth looks like it's moving as it actually moves in the real world with no camera sensors looking at my mouth to do that. Well, you can actually hook up the camera sensors to pick up face movements that look more believable, that capture all the nuance, and then you can scan the face using the headset on an Apple Vision Pro. You just turn the headset around and point it at yourself, and it scans your face and produces an avatar similar to this. This is Meta's version of the technology right now, but Apple took notes and built its own and does this right now with the Apple Vision Pro, and it's one of those reasons that headset is so ridiculously expensive. But you follow this out a few years, and you can imagine taking a cell phone and scanning your face like this in just a few seconds, and then potentially using less bandwidth to have a call with your friends, using all that, using a model of your face and just animating the individual movements rather than sending a stream of everything that's happening in the frame over the network. Well, imagine being on a plane flying over the earth and you're wearing your glasses and you've got 5 friends all gathered around you, represented as themselves, looking like themselves. But you're in a plane flying over the world, and the data stream that's getting you all of their movements and actions could hypothetically be smaller than if you had been doing a video chat. And so that's really exciting for us. And until the people that are building this for Meta, they've specifically told us, they've told me to my face that they see that their technology, the thing that they are working on, is as revolutionary as Alexander Graham Bell making the first phone call back in the 1800s. So there was a phone call that happened from one room to another, and this moment that happened where people were able to send their voice over distance. Well, now you can send your entire face, body movements, and you can teleport that across vast distances. And that technology is very, very close to my heart. I can't wait to see more people really realize that these avatars that David and I have right now are just placeholders on the path to this.
Yeah, very interesting stuff there. And as a few commenters say, the VR download drinking games going well already. I think we're ready to move on to the next topic now. I think we've talked a lot about this Meta earnings report, although I think we went slightly off topic from that in general, but still interesting stuff to talk about. And thanks for your question.
Yeah, I don't think you can blame me here this week, David. This was our audience driving this one.
Yeah, that's why I just said very interesting question that spurred some interesting conversation for sure. Let's talk about that next topic, VRChat, getting hand tracking on PC, because right now, if you're talking about what is the platform that delivers this sort of social presence that we're talking about here, the feeling of being next to someone even when you're at a great distance, is in many ways VRChat, right? And part of that is because the tracking hardware that people are using in VRChat, you're seeing people use these body tracking setups that bring their full body in. You have face tracking and eye tracking being very popular on those platforms. And now what we're seeing is hand tracking coming on PC too. So hand tracking has been there in VRChat for quite a while on Quest standalone when it comes to using it on the Quest store native on your Quest headset. But as everyone who uses VRChat knows, the best way to use VRChat is obviously on PC. You get access to higher quality worlds and avatars, and you get access to avatars and worlds that simply won't run on mobile at all. So the news here is that the open beta version of VRChat on Steam, when you opt in that beta, now will support hand tracking on PC, whereas beforehand it was pretty much designed around controllers. And so that means that you get this full hand articulation. Ian did a piece a few years ago about how people were using VRChat for remote sign language. And before you have full hand articulation, the kind of hand tracking that we have today, where it's optically tracked fingers, you would have to rely on controllers' capacitive sensors. That meant you had a limited number of gestures you could perform. So in sign language, that limited the signs you could use. With full optical tracking, there are still some signs you can't use because the system seclusion will fail, right? If I put one hand behind the other, the cameras can't see it and you get this kind of glitching of the hand. That's still going to be limited, but we're going to see a lot more sign language and also social expressivity in general. So right now, this uses Steam VR skeletal, I would say. But right now, that means that because VRChat doesn't use OpenXR, you need to use an application which will forward hand tracking into Steam VR skeletal input. You can do that with the latest beta version of Virtual Desktop if you have a Quest headset. You can do that on Apple Vision Pro with ALVR. We've talked about on this show many times before about how you can use Steam VR skeletal input apps with your Vision Pro's hand tracking through the open source tool ALVR. Or if you have a native PC VR headset, say you have a Valve Index, for example, or a Reverb G2, you can attach a Leap Motion 2 to the front of your headset and use an open source Steam VR driver. So a bunch of different ways to get on PC real articulated hand tracking in PC VRChat. I would note, though, Guy Godin is in our comments here. I haven't checked the comments, but Guy Godin has warned against using this if you're not an experienced user right now. This is currently not only a beta of VRChat, but a beta of Virtual Desktop support of this feature. And this is still in development. They have it working, but it's not perfect. There is some jank. There are some issues that if you just want this to plug and play work, wait until this is all out in the stable version is what I'm trying to say here.
Our chat has gone off on VRChat and the culture of VRChat. You can tune in on Tuesdays as Don Hopper and I go explore the worlds of VRChat, which we don't talk about the community and the sort of culture of VRChat. It's a hard thing to discuss because it's a little bit like Discord in that everything is inside of VRChat, right? Anyone can go and set up a community inside VRChat that can do anything they want, and that means you get a lot of weirdness. You get a lot of, but there are dance classes inside VRChat. There's sign language classes inside VRChat. There are even AA meetings inside of VRChat if you want to go and have a private discussion about things you're trying to change about yourself. Those are places inside of all of these social networks, hidden amongst all the rabble, right? Like, you got to go digging and find those places where you feel safe, you feel accepted. And honestly, that is what the avatars you're seeing are, right? There are people who are exploring expression in all its forms through these avatars. Maybe they've been left in the cold by traditional forms of expression, makeup, nice clothes. You can change your outfit 50 times in 30 seconds if you really want to in VRChat, and that's something you can't do with physical clothes. So it's got its own, it's got its own community, and it's got its own sort of things going on that is very hard to discuss in a format like this. So come on to Tuesdays when we talk about the various worlds that Don and I have discovered and the community has recommended for us as being really cool places. I think there's some crazy ones coming up that Don has been discovering, and we'll have those very soon. So David, what do you want to talk about now?
Yeah, I mean, what you get in VR chat really varies greatly, right? It's not this one experience. Where these social VR platforms really excel is in structured communities where there are events run by a community of full-time, volunteers and moderators who keep the social cohesion, kick out the people who are breaking the rules or making things weird, and provide these kind of structured events that people enjoy. For example, we have Shalalaska in our comments saying that they go to a VR chat gym every Wednesday and Friday. And I think Ian pointed out there's VR chat yoga, there's VR chat language lessons. There are all of these structured activities. And that's where these platforms excel and deliver something that you cannot get in any other form of media. It does something that is truly unique to VR, especially when you have people in here that have this body tracking hardware strapped to them that expresses their full physical movement. And if you haven't been in a social VR space with body tracking, you need to try it at least once. What you see there, that feeling of actually having another person's being and kind of a gait and motion in your presence is beyond what you might expect it is when it comes to some of these structured activities. Where I think these platforms don't work, and you get this breakdown, and this applies to VR Chat and Rec Room and Horizon Worlds and Roblox, is where you get like these public spaces that are unmoderated, uncurated, or just filled with children. It's people kind of running around, making memes, screaming, and that doesn't really work. That maybe it works sometimes, but I've never personally seen it work. You have to dig a little deeper there, and I think some of these platforms need to find better ways of discoverability, as some of our commenters are bringing up. There needs to be a better way to get into those communities in the right way. Maybe maybe that should be done on flat screen, right? Maybe you should have like a social network that works somewhat like Facebook and Instagram on your phone and your PC, and then when it comes to the actual activity happening, you jump in to the activity itself. I'm very surprised that, like, for example, Meta hasn't done an integration with Facebook groups, the most popular communities management platform in the world, with Horizon, so that they would have like a community group that is then linked into their Facebook profiles. They can use those same moderation tools. There's a lot of low hanging fruit here, and I expect that as these platforms have to scale to meet the next couple of 10 million, 20 million, 30 million, 50 million, 100 million VR users, they're going to have to figure out how to make this work for a wider range of people. And, for some people, as some commenters are pointing out, it is accurate to say that this kind of thing is off-putting. I should say that this picture is of one of the people who ported hand tracking to VR chat. They did some of the actual programming work here.
Yeah, so James Hughes' comment here, they've got two comments here. My struggle with VRChat is if you go to a city in real life, you see a nice place on the surface, and it has its seedy places in the cracks. And then they have a second comment here, but VRChat is the opposite. It's seedy on the surface. I've experienced this myself. You go into the default VRChat home, and then you go across the room, and there's like 5 introductory worlds. You just walk into the portal of one of them, and you're faced with just horrible interactions. You have children all the way down to 10 and under interacting with adults, yelling at each other, saying the most awful, heinous things in these core worlds. And to the commenters here, like, that are pointing out, that's by design. Someone at VRChat chose to set up those introductory worlds and to not set up the right monitoring systems to eject or segment this audience out so that it doesn't interact and doesn't cause all these things. But it's pretty heinous to go in there and see these things going on, and that is that surface level interaction that you get seconds into VR chat, and it's by design because the people in charge of VR chat have to know that sort of thing is standard on their platform. So yeah, that's we can't recommend it. And I'm seeing the Mr. Mycelium's comments saying, I used to run a talk show in VR chat. I had to stop for a number of reasons. One is that the culture was changing and being weird, no matter how much we tried to moderate it. And that is scary. That is a difficult thing. You just, like, we've been trying to set this up ourselves. I went up and set up a group, and I've set up an account for UploadVR over on VRChat to see what all of those moderation settings look like. How do you set up a bubble universe where it's only adults, and you never have to interact with any of the public facing parts of the space? Like, what is the pathway to protect people from ever having to interact with the wider public or have those negative interactions that are just one portal away from the home experience, it's not easy to do. So that is an ongoing question we have for VRChat and how they develop into the future. Let's move on, David. I thought this was going to be a quick episode because we don't have too many topics to get through today, but we are going long here. Yeah, Crispy, I'm a 51-year-old man. VR chat makes me feel icky. Same thing happens in Rec Room, right? It's like a playground, and on a playground, you have the people that are on the playground self-select for their little groups of people, right? And you've got some structural social order to let the people who are interested in doing the same things go and do the same things. The basketball players over here, the dodgeball players over here, the people that want to climb on the monkey bars over here. And you've got adults walking around all of these things, role playing in all sorts of really disgusting, creepy ways. It's not great, and we cannot recommend underage folks go into VRChat in any way, shape, or form because of how dangerous it is. And yeah, our commenters are really responding to that. So we are fully aware of this dichotomy of covering VRChat, right? It is a dangerous, scary place, creepy and uncomfortable to so many people, while at the same time, there is a subset of this community that, that's the way they were brought up, right? The VRChat is not young at this point. Like, it's been around for a very long time at this point. So there are people that have aged out of being teenagers in VRChat when they were young, and that's how they socialized in their high school years. You had COVID-19 pandemic keeping people indoors and inside headsets during their formative years. What does life look like for them? What changes have happened to the way that they think and socialize with others because they had those years growing up there? We'll if you have information, email tips@uploadvr.com. My email is ian@uploadvr.com. We're looking into this, trying to understand it. It's not something we can cover really quickly or easily because of how many different things are going on.
Yeah, it's a really difficult moderation problem with these platforms. There's no obvious solution yet. I think a lot of it is just going to be more humans involved, right? I don't think there's a way to magically, automatically, or organically moderate public spaces like this. In reality, you have, police, you have bodyguards, you have bouncers at bars, you have, real world consequences that don't exist in virtual spaces. The only successful ways I've seen this done, as I said before, is just heavy human moderation of specific communities that have zero tolerance to these sort of things. And yeah, it's difficult to find a solution here. Anti-Cleric bringing up an interesting point. Who watches the watchers? The moderators of VRChat, in Anti-Cleric's opinion, are probably weirdos. That is, I don't know if I agree on that. I haven't spoken to any of those specific moderators, so I couldn't say, but that's a difficult problem, right? You need to, in some way, have these people, I think, be employed by the platforms. You cannot rely on just these people being anonymous volunteers. There needs to be a financial model here where these people are paid and accountable to the company, or else you're going to have the same issues again, as Anti-Cleric is bringing up. I think we're ready to move to the next topic here. We're almost an hour in now. I think we can talk about Quest V68 on this. If you have anything else you want to discuss there, Ian?
Yeah, let's please move on. But like I said, do reach out to us if you have any information, solid information, actionable information that we can follow up on to understand what is going on in these communities. Yeah, let's move on, David.
Yeah, so we'll talk about two pieces of MetaQuest software tech here. The first one we'll talk about is the Quest V68 update. So Meta is still continuing to do this really rapid cadence of software updates for their Quest headsets. And V68 in many ways focuses on polish improvements. And there's quite a few of them that are just kind of polishing up the overall experience across all the Quest headsets, but in specific Quest 3. So I'll just run down the changes here quickly and then we can discuss this. So The first one for Quest 3 only is reduced OpenXR latency. So Meta says they've introduced a new frame timing algorithm for OpenXR on Quest 3 that should result in lower latency and less stuttering. So that's great to see a smoother, lower latency experience in OpenXR apps. The other Quest 3 exclusive feature, or the second of three, actually, I should say, is a new experimental option called Content Adaptive Brightness Control. And Meta says this reduces contrast in darker scenes, improving the display experience. Now, I assume that they meant to type brightness when they said reduced contrast, because we've seen this feature in other LCD devices like televisions. And the idea here is that you'll often see it called adaptive brightness. The idea here is that in darker scenes, they will dim the LCD backlight to achieve deeper blacks that are closer to true black than the murky grays you typically get in LCD. So it's a kind of software cheat to try and get a little bit better black levels out of LCD by saying, if you're in a really, really dark scene, for example, the kind of maximalist option here is if you're literally in a black loading screen where there's nothing on screen, why would you have the backlight on at all? In that case, you should just turn the backlight completely off, and then you'll only get, darkness, right? You would get complete darkness other than kind of a small glow. If you apply this more granularly, you can say that in the darker scenes, like say you're in deep space or you're in a dark hallway in a horror game, or you're in a nighttime scene in any kind of game, you bring that brightness way, way, way down and make that more suitable. Now, obviously, you're going to get a kind of loss of contrast there because you're going to not have the brightest brights at the same time. This isn't a magic way to get OLED. You're not going to get, perfect black in one part of the screen and really bright brightness on the other side of the screen with a typical LCD display like you have in a Quest 3. This is very much so going to be a compromise to just try and get rid of that glow that you get in the darkest scenes. Very interested to try this content adaptive brightness control when V68 comes out. I'll probably do an article discussing its effects and whether it's good or not. The third improvement that is for Quest 3 only is higher resolution screenshots. So beforehand, they were 1440 by 1440, and now they will be 2160 by 2160. This is great because often I find myself taking a video on Quest when I wanted a screenshot and then capturing out a frame of the video because the video recording was a lot higher res than the screenshots. That was kind of ridiculous. And before I move on to the next topic, we have some people talking about this content adaptive brightness control. Clayman saying, does it suddenly go bright and then dim annoyingly though? That's the big question, right? On LCD TVs that have adaptive brightness, you do see it, you do notice it. It can be really annoying. It's going to depend on the quality of Meta's algorithm, how harsh it does in increasing brightness and decreasing. Very interested to try this. It's one of those ones I can't really make an assessment on until I try it, and I plan to try it soon. The next improvement, and from now on we're talking about improvements for all supported Quest headsets, Quest 2, Quest Pro, and Quest 3, is improved apps and updates downloading. So there's now a downloads tab in your library, and the headset is now capable of downloading multiple apps at once. So you get downloads management where you can prioritize and schedule like you have when you click the bottom of Steam and see your downloads, and multiple at once is interesting to see because that's something it couldn't do before, and it meant that if you were kind of bottlenecked by Meta's server speed for each specific app, you would have to kind of just wait over and over. The next improvement is virtual keyboard improvements. This is very minor, just better positioning of that floating virtual keyboard. They'll let you reposition it yourself. They're more intelligent about making sure it's in the right position to type with your hands. Again, V68 is all about these little polish improvements that all add up together for a better experience. The next one is that you can adjust independently the microphone capture audio and game audio capture audio level when you're recording videos. So if your voice is too loud or you thought the app's too loud, you can tweak that yourself. Another one, low battery alert. If you take your headset off and your battery was quite low, you'll hear this new sound that's trying to tell you, put your headset on charge. Don't just set it on the table, put it on charge so that you have it ready next time. The next one, in-headset touch controller pairing. If you get a replacement touch controller or anything like that, you can now pair it in the headset. Previously, you had to use the mobile app, which was very janky. And finally, now that we've got through all of the V68 changes, we can talk about that new app that comes with it. So there's a new first-party app that's built into V68 called Layout. And Layout lets you do two things. You can measure real-world objects using the headset and its understanding of space, or you can visualize the space for new objects you're thinking of buying or making. The flagship example here being that you can visualize the exact size of a specific television on your wall. Or if you know the dimensions of like a new cabinet, a new sofa, you can get in your headset and draw out that position of what it will really look like. And that's really useful. It means you don't have to go around and hold tape measures in the air anymore if you've got your Quest headset near you. This is going to be useful for people that are doing home remodeling or getting a new TV or anything like that.
Yeah, I think we should probably just move on right to the next bit of news here because it's very related in the sort of nonstop updates that Meta is doing to its ecosystem, right? Meta has an almost weekly cadence for doing updates to its platform in various ways. So they do these big V68 updates, but then they gate various things inside that update behind testing flags so that they don't pull a CrowdStrike and take down all of the headsets all at once, right? If one of these updates causes a problem, they can roll it back and not take down the whole system like they have a couple times, right? They have actually messed up. Rift went offline. Rift went offline for a part of one day because of a security certificate issue, and then the Quest App Store went offline for a while, right? Or its entitlement check was screwed up quite recently. Well, these updates, the way they flow them out, do double purpose for Meta, right? It makes it seem like the platform is always improving and improving by leaps and bounds at a speed that is much faster than the competition. Meta or Apple at this point is doing like one or two major software updates a year for its platforms, followed by much smaller updates. It makes it seem like Apple isn't moving as fast as Meta is, and Meta is moving extraordinarily fast by comparison.
Yeah, we really don't have another consumer electronics or games console company moving at this kind of pace where you get these every month updates that add new features and major tech improvements like this. So I'll read a few comments about this. Firstly, we have David saying Quest Pro has experimental local dimming. Isn't that kind of the same? So on Quest Pro, local dimming isn't experimental. To be clear, it's a hardware level feature that can be enabled by software, and it has actually hardware behind this. So whereas on Quest 3, you have this essentially one giant backlight, on Quest Pro instead, you have like 500 little mini backlights. And what local dimming does is allows the software to control each of those 500 little backlights behind the display independently. So you can have a kind of per man's OLED where you have areas of the display that are much brighter and much dimmer than each other. But because there are only 500 of those, and there's obviously like 2 million color pixels, you're going to see this blooming, and you're still going to see the fact that you couldn't have like perfect darkness and perfect bright right beside each other. And if there's a virtual object that should be bright, but it's smaller than one of those little zones, those dimming zones, then it'll kind of have a bloom of haze of light around it. That's not the same thing as this, where you're doing it for the entire display, the entire backlight. Quest Pro wouldn't need to, because local dimming is kind of doing that already, except for those 500 little mini backlights. Some people are in the comments are pointing out that for quite a while, you've had on iPad, on iPhone, and other devices like that, the ability to, for example, in IKEA, position virtual furniture in your room. And I think that's the kind of thing that we really will likely see come to mixed reality headsets over the next few years, right? It's very likely, I think, that once you get a lot of these AR capabilities come into WebXR, you'll eventually be able to put on your Quest or your Apple Vision Pro and go onto an IKEA website and just kind of position that furniture and see it in full 3D real scale. And I think that'll be very, very common amongst retailers. That probably will be one of the biggest usages of WebXR over time. And another thing to point out, as Ian's pointing out, there is this really weird kind of dichotomy between Meta pushing out these updates really rapidly, but then actually rolling them out really slowly. So when Apple releases an update, you can just go get it, right? You don't have to wait for it to roll out. When Meta releases an update like V68, they don't say V68 is out, because that wouldn't be true. They say V68 is rolling out. And whether your headset gets it today, tomorrow, or 3 weeks from now is just completely at the whim of Meta's rollout servers. And that can be very frustrating for power users who really just want to get the latest features now.
Did I say leaps and bounds? I think I said leaps and bounds. I meant to say leaps and bounds if I was the one who incorrectly said that. But David, let's get into the next Meta's XR audio SDK because I think that's a pretty big one. David is one of those audiophiles who pays attention to audio and VR very, very carefully, and it's a big deal. I've even noticed it on my AirPods, how dramatic it is when you get spatial audio on AirPods. It's night and day. How different it feels to have audio that responds to you when you turn your head, it responds to you as you move around, and then it gets even better when the audio responds to your physical environment. And that's what we're moving towards across the ecosystem, right? You've got a very advanced audio technology out of Valve, out of Apple, and now you've got Meta's answer to that, I think, here, isn't it?
Yeah, kind of. So what we do see across all the VR platforms now is this really incredibly great spatial audio. You'll notice it if you play any VR games on Quest or Steam VR that you have this really precise ability to hear where a virtual sound is coming from directionally, right? But that's really only one part of the equation of audio. This virtual audio is something we don't talk about enough, and there is far more that you can do there than just spatialization, right? Spatialization is just the foundation, making sure that something sounds like it's coming in the direction that it should be based on its virtual position. That's the baseline. But what happens when you actually think, how should this sound interact with the environment itself? Because if you're in an empty plane that's just a flat floor and no objects, then spatialization is all you need. But that's not what a virtual world is. You have real geometry, right? You have the environment. You have all of these different objects where the sound that's coming to you is going to be affected by that in real life. When you walk into a different kind of room in real life, a different material of the wall and floor, when you go from inside to outside, what you hear from sound is completely different. And that's what we're talking about today, the simulation of propagation of sound. And so that's arriving today in Meta's XR Audio SDK through a feature called Acoustic Ray Tracing that Meta says realistically simulates how sound propagates through the geometry of the virtual world to get to your ear. And that includes reflections, reverb, occlusion, obstruction, and diffraction. So diffraction allows sound to bend around obstacles and be affected by that. Occlusion models how objects block sound if you put a virtual object between you and the virtual sound source. And obstruction simulates how sound changes as it passes through different materials. So how this works from a developer perspective is that inside, say, Unity or whatever engine they have, they tag each virtual object with a virtual material. So be that metal or plaster or plastic. There's, I think, 26 different virtual materials that they tag. And then they bake the geometry. And here you can see what that looks like to the audio SDK when this kind of cave scenes audio is being baked. In different colors, you can see the different materials and you can see the geometry. So if there's a sound source here, it's going to be affected by all of these materials and geometry. And so, Meta says, for example, you can hear the footsteps of your opponent echo down a hallway and then around the corner, giving you a clear sense of their position. And this is something that, as Ian pointed out, it's not unique to Meta. We do see this in an SDK called Steam Audio today. Steam Audio has had this for years now, but Steam Audio is designed around high-end consoles and PC when it comes to those audio ray tracing features. What Meta is claiming here is really remarkable. They're actually claiming that this will be performant on mobile chipsets of the types of Quest, regardless of the complexity of the geometry. So they're saying they have figured out an algorithm for this that is performance independent of the complexity of the geometry. And they say that this allows really complicated sound propagation simulation to be run standalone on Quest. And in fact, they've announced that the first major title that will support this technology from them is Batman Arkham Shadow. So that AAA Batman game is going to be a Quest 3 exclusive that we've talked about on the show before that we think is going to sell Quest 3 units and Quest 3S units. It's going to have this complicated acoustic ray tracing sound propagation simulation technology.
I'm curious, on our viewers, do Do you get ads watching this stream? If you're a member, do you still get ads? Let us know. I'd be really curious to let everyone else know whether those go away if you're a member watching this stream. Um, the the thing that always gets me on the Apple Vision Pro and the way it handles audio, people that are on the Quest ecosystem or have not really done this yet, haven't experienced it. On Apple Vision Pro, you've got a dial that you can use to sort of tune in a virtual world over your physical world. And the moment you do that, if you're in, say, a call, if David was on his Apple Vision Pro and I'm on mine, and we're both seeing our physical rooms around us while having a floating head basically in our space, the sound is going to sound completely different coming out of David's mouth to my ears than if I turn that dial and replace it with the like Bora Bora or some kind of a virtual environment that completely takes over my physical environment. The sound, you can do this dial thing to change the sound and how it feels, and it's completely different when you do it, both of those things.
Yeah, Apple is doing a slightly more simple but still very effective version of this audio ray tracing in your real environment, which is absolutely crazy, right? Vision Pro is generating this environment mesh of your real room, and they're doing some basic audio ray tracing of how your room's geometry affects that. Now, what they don't know is your room's material, obviously. They don't know what the difference between a brick wall and a plaster wall is in real life on your real wall, right? There's no like material sensor built into Vision Pro. It knows the geometry, but not the material. So you do get a more basic simulation, but it's still remarkable that when you walk from one room to the other in your home, the way you hear audio from virtual objects in Vision Pro completely changes, which is absolutely wild to see. But yeah, it's just great to see this advance to the point that this can now run on a Quest headset really performantly if Meta's claims are true. Mr. Mycelium is asking, does this also work on PC builds or only Android? It does work on PC, yes. I think it even works on like Mac. I don't even think this needs VR. I think Meta's, as far as I'm aware, Meta's XR audio SDK, while it's intended for use in for Quest, that's obviously what it was built for. I'm pretty sure you can use it in any game you want. And the reason Meta would do that is because then it means that developers who are building cross-platform games that run in VR and non-VR, can then just use this one audio spatialization SDK rather than having to switch between them. And we've seen, so there was an Oculus Audio SDK before the Meta XR Audio SDK. And what happened was in that transition time between Oculus and Meta, it kind of stopped seeing updates for a few years after 2019. And in that time, a lot of developers in VR adopted Steam Audio instead. Steam Audio is a great SDK. There's nothing wrong with it, but Meta, obviously, from its perspective, wants developers back on its own SDK. And so last year, and we talked about this last year on the show, Meta added this really big update to the Meta XR Audio SDK, which radically improved its HRTF, its spatialization. And Meta has claimed since last year that its SDK has the leading audio spatialization, meaning that when you do a blind test of someone, you put them in a VR headset, but you have no display on, and then you ask where did that sound come from, and they have to point with their hand, literally just point with their hand the direction. They claim that their SDK wins in their testing internally over any other now. So now that they have leading spatialization according to them and leading performance for propagation simulation, we could see a lot more developers start to use this. And the showcase for this will be Batman Arkham Shadow, right? If you go into Batman Arkham Shadow and you think, wow, that sounds like it's coming from down that alley, or you walk into a building and you're like, wow, everything's changed from the soundscape. It sounds like I've just moved from outdoors to indoors. If that works, then Meta's going to get a lot of developers jumping on this bandwagon.
I do. We have the exclusive reporting on UploadVR.com where I got that they were doing real-time lighting on Quest 3 with Batman Arkham Shadow, and that alone, you pair that up with audio that could be as good as this, it's going to open a lot of eyes to the quality of an experience when you can personalize and make it feel like you're there that much more. It's going to open up a lot of minds in a very short span of time, and that includes developers, right, as well as the actual users. I think it's time for us to move on here pretty soon to the Omni One. Is there any comments you want to respond to before we do that?
Yeah, I think we're ready to move on. I'm just having a look at the comments now. Roar McRip Helmet is pointing out that um, that while an SDK is crucial for providing high quality spatialization, early reflections, and occlusion, they're saying the rest can be done with traditional sound design techniques. And that's very true. That we've seen games kind of manually craft like a difference in audioscape between indoors and outdoors. And if you have a talented sound designer on your team, sure, you're going to be able to do that for zero performance cost. But I think what the promise of this kind of SDK is that you can then do that without having to have all of that extra sound design work, and for really complicated geometry that there's no hard distinction between indoors and outdoors. Like, for example, the example they give of a cave where you go in and there's this really different soundscape, and maybe even something that has like partially outdoors and partially indoors. And yeah, it'll be interesting to see how well this works. But I think, as you say, we're ready to talk about this thing here.
Yeah, I'm seeing people suggest a YouTube Premium to avoid those ads. It's apparently not. If you become a member on YouTube of UploadVR, it doesn't keep you from the ads on here. So that's an example of the platform. I don't know. How would I describe it? That YouTube is trying to pump more revenue out of its shrinking user base as people get sucked into TikTok and other places. YouTube still has its quarterly earnings that it needs to report to the larger Google company, and we're playing part of that platform war. It all relates, right? If you the only thing I'll add though is you can come to uploadvr.com, become a member, and that takes away the ads on uploadvr.com, where we have complete control over your experience over there on uploadvr.com now, thanks to the hard work of David Heaney over here. Let's move on here.
Yeah, we'll have to triple check our ad settings. As far as I'm aware, we put the lowest ad quantity setting, but that may have reverted somehow. We will. I hear you, commenters, that you're saying that there's too many ads, perhaps, and we will look into that and make sure that that's not an issue for next week. Just as I think last week we got some feedback that there wasn't a link to uploadvr.com in our description. I put a link to UploadVR in our description. We're very much so willing to take feedback on these sort of things and make sure that you get the best VR download experience possible. But yes, let's talk about the Omni One, this VR treadmill system. And when I say system, that's because the unique proposition here is that this isn't just a treadmill that you use with your existing headset. This is a full integrated package that comes with a headset, controllers, and treadmill. And sorry, just Garrett B laughing that the ads only come on when I start talking for some reason. You're pressing that ad button in the background, Ian. I know you're doing it.
Yeah, I'm all, this is my mute button, but yeah, I have no control over the ads. We have no control over the
No,
ads
we don't.
except what David suggested before we come in. There's one setting we can hit on like how frequent it is, and we'll have to have a look at what that setting is and see if we can tweak that in the future so it's a little bit less disruptive. No, I am not hitting the ad button.
Jokes aside, Ian is obviously not controlling the ads. I'm just kidding about that. But yeah, let's talk about Omni One. So it's a full system. It's a headset and controllers, and a treadmill that comes together. And the idea is that this is a Pico 4 enterprise headset, if you haven't already recognized it. But this isn't running Pico software. You're not running the Pico platform. You won't be using a Pico account. This is only being sold in the United States. Instead, this is running a custom platform, Virtuix's platform itself. And on this store, all of the games that are there, the developer has specifically added support for this treadmill with their SDK. Now, one thing I should also point out is that treadmill is technically misleading. There is no moving belt here. This is not a moving belt. Instead, you wear these special shoes that slide along this concave disc-shaped base, while a harness here is attached to you to hold you in place, so you stay stationary while you are moving your feet. These are sometimes called slip mills or slide mills. They're not great in my opinion. They're obviously not anywhere near a real treadmill, but to do a real omnidirectional treadmill is going to cost significantly more, because you need to have like this perfect foot tracking and this reactive 2-axis treadmill. It's a whole nightmare. So this is what's available at the consumer cost for now. This thing is going to cost $2,600, and it comes with the headset and controllers. Now, Guy Godin is asking whether it's legal. I think you're asking whether it's legal for them to load this with their own platform. Yes, they are, because Pico 4 Enterprise lets you do whatever you want, essentially, right? If you get to play around with the software as much as you want, you're allowed to have access to the cameras as well, right? We talk about that often. You can, if you're a company that buys the Pico 4 Enterprise, you get access to cameras. It also has eye tracking and face tracking and faster RAM, but it's more expensive. It's around €900, which I'm not sure how exactly that factors into dollars, but we know it's €900 in Europe. And so that is part of the overall cost of this system. But Virtuix over the past years has built up quite a decent library for launch. And when I say the past years, this thing was originally announced almost 4 years ago as launching in late 2021. And back then it was supposed to actually use a Pico Neo 2, if you remember that headset, way back before even Pico Neo 3 came out. This is a really kind of old headset. And obviously, since there's been so many delays, they've upgraded it to this Pico 4 Enterprise. And as I've said many times, Pico 4 is a great headset. It really is a great headset. It's a shame that it never launched in the United States. But I'll run through some of the titles they've got for this. So it's a huge disadvantage in one way that they've gone for this business model, because it means that if you're already a VR user, you would have to abandon your current setup. But in another way, it's a good proposition for someone who is currently not a VR user today, who said, I'll get that VR thing when it's a treadmill that you actually run around. How many people have you heard say that? It's actually, I've heard quite a few. And this is, the idea is that if you are a person who's willing to spend $2,600, you get this fully integrated kit. They have on their store Alvo, Ancient Dungeon, Breachers, Death Horizons, Drop Dead the Cabin, Dyschronia, Ghostbusters, Hubris, Elysia, In Death Unchained, Journey to Foundation, Peaky Blinders, Propagation Paradise Hotel, Ruins Magus, Sniper Elite VR, Survival Nation, The Exorcist, Wanderer, and that library should build up. So it's a really difficult proposition to analyze here, because you're going to miss out a huge quantity of content that's available on Steam and on Quest. But everything that you do get, you're not hacking in the treadmill support. The SDK is directly interfacing with the foot tracking built into this, because not shown here is the fact that you actually have these little foot tracker things that you attach on in the box, and that's how it kind of knows where your feet are moving. So I don't know. What do you think about this one, Ian?
Yeah, so we'll have Kyle going to check this out in the real world to see what it is, and David and I will check in with him and make sure he's really putting the makers of this to task on just how believable that slippy feeling feels to your feet, right? Like, I saw it in our comments from Guy Godin. Shipping a new product with an XR2 in 2024 is just a terrible idea, and I have to. I feel for that comment, because no matter how good, even if this was good, even if the slippy feeling on your feet actually worked 100%, you're still pairing it up with this headset and this platform that, to David's point, it has a large number of apps. But unless you're, I'm not seeing it. Unless you're Meta or Apple or even Google with Google Play able to bring in the vast majority of apps, you're giving yourself a lesser platform to base your entire experience on. Like, I'm not seeing what market this appeals to, and some very funny jokes in our comments about exactly who would use this and in what circumstances. There's, of course, I want to say, Community, in the Community episode that they used VR in, they showed to be using something similar to this with their ridiculous super boxy VR headset. Like, this thing is not new. Even in Ready Player One, you see the Omni treadmill underneath the main character there in that movie, but you watch physically, you watch the special effects show that treadmill running at the speeds necessary and turning on a dime exactly as necessary to make it work for that player. We're not anywhere near that. We're not going to be near that on consumer levels for an extremely long time. There's a couple, I think, ready-made, like tens of thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars setups that are trying to build to that. But I've seen hamster balls. I've gone to VR conferences where someone had a hamster ball set up basically to try to create that effect. None of them work great, and it's we're in a phase where, like, these ideas, I don't see the market for these ideas anymore. I'm growing tired of like seeing these ideas that just they're going for a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of the market while pretending that they're ready for a market that's larger than that.
Yeah, I mean, it's okay that some products are niche, right? There are niche products and they exist and they're a thing, and not everything has to be this super wide consumer market. But it is right to say that even within that niche, the price here is probably too high, right? If this was 1,600, it would be a little different. Ideally, you get to somewhere around like 1,000, 1,200, and then this becomes like a kind of wealthy person's impulse purchase at that point. As Guy Godin points out, that is a really good point to say that getting this thing, they say it's going to start shipping in September with this outdated XR2 Gen 1 chipset is going to be a real problem when we expect that there's going to be a Pico 4S or Pico 4 Ultra that we're not sure what the name is going to be that upgrades to that new XR2 Gen 2 that you see in Quest 3 and soon Quest 3S. You're going to feel like you're a little bit behind there. I do wonder, though, they do have eye tracking on this thing. Are they going to integrate some sort of foveated rendering? That's a big question. We don't know yet. Are you going to get VRChat on this thing? Because that could be impactful for some people if you then have the face tracking and eye tracking brought in. It's kind of funny that the reason they're using Pico 4 Enterprise is because it allows them to do all this customization and have their own platform on top of it. But I don't think they really wanted the extra cost of the hardware there. Ideally, they would have the headset hardware cost less.
Well, I like the slippers, right? Like it's just, do you have your VR slippers on yet? Like that's such a silly, like how if VR was already embarrassing you, now you've got to also say I got to go put my VR slippers on. But the thing, like for me, is there's a large community of people who love to dance. Like I mean, it sounds ridiculous to say, but like there's dancing is this fundamental. I've brought it up before. This fundamental human activity across every culture, and it only works when you can actually track legs that move the way they believe to move. You don't get that out of the system. You get
no, you don't get that. This is not for that kind of like. It's not for stationary, like moving your legs like you would dancing. This is for tracking the speed that you're running. Right? It's for replacing pushing a thumbstick with rotating around on this thing and just actually running with your body. And
so
again.
So it seems
great.
to be.
It doesn't feel like running. No, continue.
No, it feels like it's solving the wrong problem. Is what I was going to say. It's solving a problem, but the wrong one that needs to be solved for bringing more people in and entertaining them for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, I do think it's going to get a lot of people. Not a lot, but there are going to be people that buy this that aren't aware that slip mills are not the Ready Player One feeling. I feel like misleading marketing may help them a little bit here, unfortunately, in that, as I said near the start of this discussion, there are people out there who say, oh, well, I'll be interested in VR when it's a treadmill that you run on, not a thumbstick that you push. I don't know if you've met people like that, but I've met people who have this opinion. It's intuitively to them, even though we know as people who've tried this that it doesn't really make sense because you're not really moving, right? Your inner ear is fully aware that you're not actually moving. Even if you do have a perfect omnidirectional treadmill, your inner ear is not tricked. You're stationary. Your body is smart enough to know that you're stationary, unfortunately. So that's the problem that means that these things really, even in the best possible hardware configuration 20 years from now, don't work. You have to, if you really want to replace sort of thumbstick motion for movement, you need something that can trick the brain into your inner ear into thinking that it's stationary. And we'll talk about that another time because that's a whole different topic and area of research.
Are we ready to move on here? Is there more you wanted to talk about here? We've got, as it is in most weeks, I think we're going to be moving to the bigger discussion-worthy things at the end of this show. We've only got a couple more topics here. But I think it's going to be a big one. I think we're going to end up talking about this last one for a very long time.
I don't know. I'm nearing the limits of heat here, but we'll see. Yeah, this is basically one big topic in two news pieces, and it's PlayStation VR2. So, as I said at the start of the show, if you've been living under a virtual rock, PlayStation VR2 is currently on a mega discount. It's normally $550, and it's now being sold for $350, a $200 discount. By far the biggest sale we've seen, a really massive discount. And the accompanying news here is that The Shortcut, which is a news outlet, reports that a source showed it retailer data revealing a 2,350% increase in PSVR 2 headset sales on the first day of this discount compared to the day before. And they say that this represented more units sold in one day than all year so far. We're in August now, right? This was the end of July. We're talking 7 months versus one day. And what this shows really, really clearly, as something I've been saying on this show a lot, and Ian's been saying on this show a lot, and we've been hammering home, price matters. Price really, really does matter. It's not some abstract thing that it doesn't, the most important spec of the headset at the end of the day for mass adoption, if mass adoption is your goal, is the price. And for those that would push against that and say, well, why does everything have to be mass adoption? Why do we have to have these platforms be mass adopted? The reason is if you want games, if you want a developer to want to invest the hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars needed to build the big meaty content that you're wanting, and I know you're in that comments wanting it, why would they do that for a small audience when that small audience, even if every single one of them buys the game, is not going to cover the cost of the game? The way that you get the big meaty AAA content that all VR gamers want is you get headsets in people's hands so that there's an actual consumer market out there to buy those games. And then you start to get this, really effective feedback loop where the bigger games are then able to be sold to this large audience. And then that large audience buys those games, which funds bigger games. And that's how you get these successful entertainment markets, right? And one way we've seen that arrive so far in VR, the majority of the way we've seen big AAA content arrive is through this sort of artificial injection by companies like Meta, who build these games or fund these games with no expectation of ever seeing a real return. And so this gives people this false expectation that this is going to happen from any developer. That why doesn't that developer build a AAA game? Why are they giving me this little, cover shooter? Or why is this only this 2-hour experience? I want a 16-hour AAA experience. Well, because there aren't enough headsets out there. And if headsets are out of people's price range, then that's never going to be fixed. So what we see here is price sensitivity is clearly extreme for PlayStation VR 2, where you have this psychological effect that has been there since launch, where the headset is priced higher than the console. And you have these people who are buying consoles, many of them instead of a PC, partly because of the convenience, but also because of the price, that they can put $350 or $400 in and buy their PlayStation 5, and there you go. And then you try to say, oh, well, you want to play VR on this thing for this limited number of VR games? You're going to have to pay more than you just paid for your console. And their response, and as what we've seen in the past year, is no, I'm not going to spend that much. And I've argued before on this show that what Sony should have done is built off the success of PlayStation VR 1 with a more affordable headset, not go the opposite way. Maybe do a tiered system, right? Have a PSVR 2 and a PSVR 2 Pro. I'm not saying the high end shouldn't be served. Those people put in the biggest retention. They're the ones that come back and play games over and over. Sure, great. But there needs to be an entry-level headset. And right now, what we're kind of seeing with this price cut is Sony providing it for PlayStation VR 2. What we don't know is how long is this going to last? Sony has not announced this. There was no announcement of this price cut. We only noticed it by seeing it on retailers, right? We asked Sony, how long is this on for? Is this a permanent price cut? We did not, to date, at the time of broadcasting, get a response.
Yeah, and we will follow that up. I see our commenters responding to those ideas. David has been, it's funny, like I'm going to, I've been beating this drum here on this podcast with you in audience, saying that this is going to happen for a very long time, that we were going to see a PSVR 2 on PC support. And then the day it finally got confirmed, I came in here and David said, yeah, you were right, but for the wrong reasons. So I appreciated that that context there on him pushing back. Now I'm going to make more predictions here on what is going to happen next, right? You've got PC getting its first major new headset of 2024. You get Steam adding what used to be a competitor now to the Steam ecosystem. You're going to have all these people that had a PSVR 2 headset suddenly just given a new ecosystem to try their headset out with if they really want to. Half-Life Alyx, Elite Dangerous, all these great PC experiences, Flight Simulator, you should be able to access on this headset with OLED with haptic effects that are different than you can get out of other headsets and other controllers. And what
I
is
don't
next?
think the precision haptics are going to be there. Unfortunately, most of the
Mm,
features are actually not there. You don't get eye tracking, you don't get HDR, you don't get headset vibration, and you don't get the
right
precise
now,
controller. This is bare
right
bones
now.
support.
Right now, and that's this is me pushing back on David, right? This is him saying that it was no benefit to Sony to do this, and me going years ago now saying, I think you're wrong. I think you've got a lot of overlap in the value of these platforms over time. And Sony is a massive multinational corporation. They're a global conglomerate with lots of subsidiaries working in different countries on different things, and it causes such a complicated problem for us as viewers to understand who benefits in what ways, right? We believe Sony is the supplier of the displays inside of the Sony or inside of the Apple Vision Pro. So Sony, as this major conglomerate, has missed the timing and screwed up a little bit with how it gets to market with this headset and how it benefits PSVR2 customers. It hasn't a whole lot. There's been a lot of PSVR2 customers that have just kind of gotten really sad with the flow of content onto their ecosystem. Um, None of this stuff happens in a vacuum. This is happening within a month of Meta coming out and displaying their next generation of VR. And you've got, to my eyes, Valve evolving its platform just a little bit further. They're adding another partner to their ecosystem of Steam, and they're getting things ready for what comes next. There is a route for a headset that Valve could make to follow up Index that does things differently, that makes Steam a more valuable place for you, and uh, blurs the lines between 2D content and 3D content in really, really interesting ways. But Valve isn't ready to do that this year by all accounts. Maybe we get surprised. Instead, they've got PSVR 2 to kind of hold Meta at bay, so to speak. Remember, we're really soon from seeing PSVR 2 officially represented on that Steam hardware survey. And all those Quest 3S buyers, all those Quest 3 buyers, there's a percentage of PSVR 2 buyers, Quest 3 buyers, Quest 3S buyers who, as soon as they get tired of the stuff that they can find in the Meta ecosystem, they're going to plug that thing into a PC and enjoy the next level of immersion. And that's what I'm so excited for. I'm so excited to see those people making that bridge over to PC and how much better PC gets over the next 6 months to a year because of that bridge getting that much bigger.
Yeah, as I've said before on this topic, I just don't think there is some grand strategy going on here from Sony. Sony is this giant conglomerate, yes, but their subsidiaries are all very, very different, right? The subsidiary that is responsible for PlayStation, including this hardware, is called Sony Interactive Entertainment, and sometimes they just call themselves PlayStation. They're a completely different company to the Sony Display Systems company that makes those panels that go into Vision Pro, and both of those are completely different from Sony Electronics, that is making that standalone headset for enterprise creativity. There's very unlikely, from what I've heard and seen, that there is some sort of grand overarching strategy happening between these companies. And I don't think that this PC support is part of some grand strategy either. In fact, that's why I think it's so low effort. I think this sale and this PC support, unfortunately, is, as some of the commenters are pointing out here, Sony ditching this thing. Sony realizing this hasn't worked at this price point. We've developed a product that is not at the right price point for the market that it needed to be. It's come in too high. It hasn't got the adoption. Therefore, you've had this kind of negative death cycle of developers not supporting it enough, of Sony itself not being willing to invest in the first party content beyond launch to really keep the momentum going. And so they're saying, right, we had that report from Bloomberg back in March claiming that this got so bad that Sony paused PlayStation VR2 headset production. A few weeks before that, Sony closed down the studio that was developed the original PlayStation VR blockbuster Blood and Truth and laid off employees in the studios behind Horizon Call of the Mountain. We've seen these very clear signs that this may be akin to a fire sale. And part of that is saying, how do we get rid of this thing? One, we cut the price. Two, we make it available on PC so people don't need to have a PS5 to buy it. And what you see here is bare minimum support, as people are pointing out in the comments. As I said before, you don't get support for eye tracking. No. HDR? No. Controller haptics? No. Headset vibration? No. And that means there's no foveated rendering here, right? You're not getting that headline flagship ability that could make this, a dramatically different kind of PC headset. This is making this thing work in the most bare minimum sense possible.
Mhm.
And if I see a sign different, sure. If you saw something, if this was part of some ecosystem play, you'd maybe see Sony bring some of PlayStation VR2's biggest titles over to PC and say, look, here's a new way to enjoy PSVR 2. Here's Horizon Call of the Mountain on Steam. Here's Gran Turismo 7 in VR on Steam. Here's some of our other VR titles. There's no sign of any software play here at all.
What you just described, the services that David just described as being absent from this integration, are all the services unnecessary to have to run Half-Life Alyx on this machine in Steam VR? So what you get is a Steam VR machine that's only a couple $100, and a Steam VR headset that's only a couple $100. You attach that to your PC, and you've got an OLED machine driving Half-Life Alyx in the year 2024. Question becomes, where do we go from here? What is the next step of all those things? Well, getting Half-Life Alyx to your PSVR 2 customers is no small feat. It's not a small thing. And I'll frame it this way, right? How is Xbox faring for Microsoft? Is the Xbox Live streaming really is cloud streaming really the way gamers want to play games? Do you really want to queue for your game to get access to the server so you can run your game, or do you want it sitting on a local device? Sorry, go ahead,
that's a misrepresentation, right? You're going to see queuing very rarely in very small occasions, and if Microsoft scales properly, nobody should see it at all, right? It's like saying, do you want to use YouTube? And sometimes YouTube might go down. Like, that's not the experience of using cloud gaming. And the whole point of cloud gaming is it's for people who don't want to buy a console, people who want to buy a game but not a console. It's not for the people who already own a console. That's what the Xbox consoles are for.
You're talking. We had on our studio, we had in this studio the people from Plutosphere. We've mentioned this multiple times. The people from Plutosphere who were doing streaming from the cloud to your headset, and they were doing it at just a few milliseconds of latency to try to prove out these ideas of what happens if you take the PC, you put it in the cloud, and then you stream everything from that to your headset. What does that look like? How many people can be served in what countries, and what will their experience be like? Well, I want more people to experience what it's like to have I forget what the install size is for Half-Life Alyx, but it's let's say it's 20 gigs. I can't remember the amount, but let's say it's a 20 gig install to put Half-Life Alyx on your local machine. And I don't care if that machine is a PS5 or we haven't even. I know. Don't even. He's going to turn off the mute button to yell at me. I don't care if that is a PS5 or a PC. Having Half-Life Alyx locally on a local machine is going to give you an incredible experience in VR. It's going to give you hours and hours of entertainment, and it's going to be comfortable. It's not going to make you sick in the same way cloud streaming might do. And David, like you put a big if into Microsoft's cloud streaming efforts. In big cities, it's going to work. In little cities and the people who go and buy consoles, it's not going to work. You want to have Half-Life Alyx. Like it's meaningful to our audience, and it's meaningful to a lot of people out there to know that when the internet goes down, I can still play my game.
Sure, but how did this get on the cloud streaming? This isn't about cloud streaming. Neither Sony or Valve are doing anything to do with the cloud here. That's not what we're talking about at all. This PSVR2 coming to PC doesn't let any more people enjoy Half-Life Alyx that because they could already get a PC VR headset for $350. They could already get a $200 headset with Quest 2, right? This doesn't change anything about how many people can play Alyx. If you have a gaming PC right now, 6 months ago, you could go and buy a $200 Quest 2 and wirelessly, if you have a good enough router, play Half-Life Alyx. Kaboom. This doesn't change anything about that. For people who got a PS5, who have a PS5 and a PSVR 2 already, sure, this means for $60 they can go and
What
play that. But I mean, as we've been talking about, the entire problem here is that that's quite a small number of people because of the price point. I mean, I guess it's nice that you can now go from PS5 to PC and use both of them with this one headset. That's cool, but we already kind of had that with Quest. You have a consoleized MetaQuest ecosystem and a PC headset in one currently $200 headset.
what would it change anything if there was let's say a PS5 Pro that ran Steam? Would
Sure,
that
but yeah, sure,
mean
100%. That
anything
would
to
be
you,
a
David?
completely different discussion, but that's not what we're seeing here yet, right? There's no indication of that. There hasn't been a single rumor of that. If it happens, sure, we'll talk about it, and that is a multi-way ecosystem play, and then you can say maybe this was part of that. But I've seen no indication of that happening, right? Like, and why wouldn't the PS5 be able to run it? The PS5 already is a VR capable machine. It's running VR games today. It's running the same games you can play on PC VR in many cases. It doesn't need a
Uh,
Pro.
so I've got no information on this. So to David's point, we're speculating. This is complete speculation for me. But imagine that maybe Sony was imagining a wireless PSVR 2. Imagine a higher end or a future edition of PSVR 2. I could imagine that thing getting canned at some point because they need to get on to the next thing. They need to get on to standalone and then connect it to their console ecosystem. And as a stopgap, what I would do is I would ship a PS5 Pro and support Steam on it while also supporting Steam with the existing PSVR 2. You get one headset that works on both systems, and then you can hold off your competition for a little while.
What
Maybe
incentive would
I am
Sony
wrong,
have
so
to
I'll
run
take that.
Steam? I mean, I think you're missing the platform play, right? Like, Sony on PS5 gets a 30% cut of each game you buy in the PlayStation Store, right? That's why I didn't think this would happen. And you're right to say that it's completely, I was completely wrong to say this would ever happen. But you also hinted at the wrong reasons. This is happening because they want to get rid of this thing, because they can't sell it to PS5 owners. And so they have a built up stock. They have likely billions invested to build the thing in the first place. And if you find a way if you have a product that you have too much inventory of that you cannot sell, and you find a new market to sell it to, and all it takes is making a little adapter that takes in DisplayPort and USB and power, you're going to do it. And if you really are trying to cut it off, I just think that if you look at the evidence here, what really matches? Does this match to you as some giant strategic ecosystem play to unify Sony and Valve, or does it match that they have something they made too much of? They find the cheapest way to get rid of the thing, and they've done it in the lowest effort way possible without doing. If this is a partnership with Valve, you're telling me Valve wouldn't have wanted to get high dynamic range and
Mhm.
eye tracking and foveated rendering and these advanced haptics? Like, of course, Valve would have. If Sony had come to Valve and say, "Work with us for a few months and get all of the features of our headset as this giant partnership," they would have done it in a heartbeat, and they haven't because Sony doesn't care.
I like our commenter here. What am I doing? David is already overheating because of the weather, so I'm just raising his temperature just a couple more degrees. Oh wow, Onikaze is telling me that Half-Life Alyx is almost 70 gigabytes. David's right. I like he's absolutely right. But I'm seeing in our comments the people say Valve needs to make a Steam machine. Well, why isn't the PS5 a Steam machine? It would benefit them both.
Why would that benefit? Why would that benefit Sony? So if it runs Steam, Valve gets the money when you buy. Consoles are sold at a cost or loss. It's the same thing as Quest, right? They make the money on the store. Why would they give
Here's
someone else the store?
because I think the time for consoles has passed. And it breaks my heart to say that, and I could be wrong. But I think that what
Nintendo
we're
just
seeing out of
sold Nintendo just sold more Switches than any of its consoles ever. It's the Nintendo selling record Nintendo Switches. They're selling this thing sold what? Sorry, the PlayStation 5 sold 50 million units. Like maybe Xbox consoles are over. Microsoft seems to have fallen behind, but like what specific evidence do you point to that says that the time for consoles is over?
Because of the openness of the Quest ecosystem. That is the evidence that I have. So Meta has made a bet and said we're going to be the most open operating system. They're saying they're making claims, big bold claims that the Horizon OS is going to be as malleable as Windows was back in the 80s that helped Windows cement itself as the operating system of choice. You could do what you want with it. Um, I you, you can. I've got my Steam Deck, and I am messing with the Linux underbelly of that Steam Deck uh, in such beautiful, amazing ways to bring in not just what Valve will let me see, but all the stuff that I have around me, all the gaming that I have around me that goes back 30 years. I can bring that into the Steam Deck. It's it feels like we're going to be able to do that very soon with the Quest in a standalone form factor. All those things uh, that run on Linux are going to run on Android. And given the openness of this operating system play, it's going to pry open other operating systems, other plays, so that they are more open. And that's what I'm arguing here is you can't necessarily like Nintendo is the exception to the rule there. Like Nintendo can obviously make a major market for itself by focusing on quality content that is years in development before they actually reveal what those devs are making. But I don't know if there's room for another console besides what Nintendo is doing.
It's an interesting idea. I mean, maybe you're right. I just don't see any evidence of it. I don't see any reason that's like Sony's not just going to give up a business. They're not just going to say, right, let's. So think of what this would mean in practice. If the PlayStation was just running Steam, not only would you have this huge problem with quality, and then you would kill one of the reasons that people like consoles, that it just works. You take away this curated platform, you're just having this wild west of Steam. You then also have to make money on the hardware. So if Sony was now just selling consoles, now the PlayStation doesn't cost $400 anymore. It costs $800, and the PS5 Pro costs $1,500 because they're making money on the hardware. That's the new business you're proposing. It's also one of the biggest problems with Meta's Horizon OS play, right? Like Meta has said itself, they don't expect that this is going to be this mass market thing. These are for niche headsets, for niche applications, because you have the same problem. Asus, Lenovo, any other company that makes a Horizon OS headset, they have to make profit on the hardware. There was actually a console in the 90s that tried this approach where it was different, loads of different manufacturers would run this open platform. I think it was called 3DO, if I remember correctly, and it horrendously failed. Why? Because the hardware was more expensive than everything else. Do you know who else failed at this approach? Valve. Steam machines horrendously failed because each maker of a Steam machine had to make a profit on the hardware. What makes Steam Deck great, yes, it's open in the operating system sense, but when it comes to the fact of like it's still you're getting hardware and software from the same company. You're running the Steam store on Steam Deck. That's why Valve can sell Steam Deck at likely cost. Steam Deck is not making some massive hardware profit. We've heard Valve's Gabe Newell say that it was painful to price it. It was where it was, suggesting they may even be slightly subsidizing it. Why? Because they know that when you get that thing, you're going to buy a bunch of games on Steam. And every time you do, they're going to get a 30% cut. And that has always been where the money is here. The hardware is not the moneymaker, it's the platforms. And these companies will hold on to control of their platform until they die because of it. It's why Pico and
Until
HTC don't use Horizon OS, right? Why do Pico and HTC not use Horizon OS? Because they want to make money on the Vive store and the Pico store, where the real money is.
and they are the likeliest to be in trouble, right? Like Vive is the earliest one that they've held on to a business market for a very long time because that's their ready-made solution. But like I said, Horizon OS, this openness promise from Meta that they're going to be the most open solution is going to threaten that pitch. It's going to threaten that market finally for Vive after all of these years. Pico could still come back and try again with a lower price, maybe a hand tracking only interface. Maybe you differentiate Pico by trying to sell without controllers and then have the controllers as an add-on if Meta is choosing to package it in. These companies are fighting for the scraps that Meta leaves behind. And if you don't really own up to the idea that Meta has crushed you again and again already, like you don't die. You go for a slower death that maybe gives you a couple, like one more product chance a couple years out. And that's what I'm getting at, David. A wireless standalone headset from Sony that doesn't, okay, imagine Sony releasing a standalone headset next year that doesn't connect over virtual desktop to Steam. What wouldn't that die instantaneously against Meta?
Well, I don't think they're going to do a standalone in general, but it depends if it connected to your PS5, right? That would be a completely different proposition because then you have standalone games like a PSVR2 mini or sorry, PSVR2 portable, a PSVR2P, and then you connect it to your PS5 for bigger games. I think you're going to have the same issue there that would happen if Valve tried to do this, which is then you then have these two completely separate ecosystems. I think Sony has this PlayStation brand that has been about quality. They didn't choose to go for a lower price console this generation, even when Microsoft did. Microsoft went with the Series S and Series X approach. Sony said, no, we're going to do one high end console. And that's actually succeeded. I think if you look at this headset, right, I've talked about that I wish they'd made some compromises to get the price down. That's not their brand. They went for these OLED panels. They thought, I don't want to show this low contrast LCD murky gray experience. They made the trade-offs needed. And I think if you look at what might happen in a PlayStation VR3 eventually, I think they'll want to do a tiered approach. I think they'll want to bring out a cheaper one and a more expensive one that pushes the boundaries. I think that's what they'll probably learn if they do. For PlayStation 6, for example, when that starts to come around, the higher end one, probably you'll see like micro OLED displays and wireless. The low end one, I think you'll likely see Sony finally just biting the bullet and releasing an LCD headset to get the base out there of people to buy. Just a few comments I want to respond to here quickly. Rudel Vendo said, Quest will never be as big as Nintendo Switch and PlayStation. And you were so close to right until you said, and Xbox. Because as we've said on this show many times, Quest 2 and 3 have actually sold roughly the same amount as Xbox Series S and X. You can say that was Microsoft's failure, but regardless, it's not true to say Quest is pretty much the same size of a market as Xbox now, which is not people aren't really appreciating. Wabo is taking part of our sides here. He's saying he agrees with me on how platforms work in the 30% cut, but he agrees with you, Ian, that consoles are on the decline. My one response to that is to say that I think if you look at the analysis of that, it's that the time that people used to spend on consoles has now moved to TikTok and Instagram Reels and short form content like that. The entertainment industry has devised something more addictive than a video game console, and it is an infinite scrolling feed of short videos that are designed algorithmically to take your attention perfectly. So I think that's a wider societal trend there, but we'll have to see in the future.
Wow, I glazed over my eyes while David was saying it. It sounded really impactful and important, and we are diving into the very core of the platform tensions that are happening here between what TikTok and Meta and Apple and Sony, and we are all wondering what is happening next. I appreciate the comment here saying always, what was it? I'm folding my arms in a huff because I have to wait a few more years. Please put me in a cryo sleep so I can just skip to it and see how it all shakes out. I empathize with that in our audience. We're always thinking about the future here and how it's going to shake out and who is going to really provide us all of those visuals in the future directly to our headset. It is an open question. Who is going to win? We thank you so much to our audience for sticking with us on this journey, following through on this wonderful discussion. We appreciate I think you appreciate the way David and I disagree with each other so much and so frequently, yet I think we do it pretty respectfully in the grand scheme of things, and we see that play out in our audience as well. So thank you to our audience for keeping that respectful atmosphere sure we want to carry that through into the future. If you have new people coming into the comments after asking basic questions, please help them out if we're not able to get to them. And we will see you in the future. Come back on Tuesdays with Don Hopper and I in here as we discuss all the ways people play games in VR. And then on Thursdays with David Heaney and I. We've got a lot of travel coming up over the next couple months, so it's going to be hard for us to keep to the schedule. I think we might end up having to do a couple pre-recorded episodes in order to keep to our schedule with you, our audience. Please become a member on UploadVR.com to support the journalism work we do directly, and we will see you in the future. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, everyone. Yeah, as Ian said, I think a lot of people here appreciate that we'll give you our real views on these things. We'll try to break this down as deeply as possible. We think deeper than a lot of the other VR podcasts. And if we disagree, we're going to say that, because we want to give you the different perspectives on where this technology might be going on some of these really complicated topics, and let you decide where you think the answer is. Maybe sometimes it's in the middle. Maybe sometimes I'm right. And maybe, God forbid, sometimes Ian's even right.
I appreciate that. All right. Well, I'm going to take the Sony one to the bank. It's the one thing I'll be right on for the next 5 years. So I'll hold on to that. It helps me sleep at night. So we'll see you in the future.
Thanks so much, everyone. We'll see you next week.